the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals. With me is co-host Seth Cox from AvengeOfTheBirds.com, the SB Nation Arizona Cardinals site, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. We're at episode 430. Minicamp is over, and we are now in the waiting. We are now waiting for things to happen. And so now it is content creation time, aggregation galore, lists and rankings, and soon enough we'll do our divisional rankings. We'll do the opponent show previews, the opponent previews that'll be coming up in the next month or so. But yeah, Seth, this is where we have to stretch for content, don't we?
Yeah, it's not always the best, but it is what it is, and we go through this and try to get, work done and get into this and try to get some content out, but also keep the discussion going about what this is starting to look like and take shape as best we can, because as we've kind of alluded to throughout the offseason, this is new, right? So this is obviously going to be like 2018 or 2019 offseason, where we're trying to figure out and in a way, and not in the negative way, but in a way, it's probably closer to 2018 offseason, where we really don't know anything about what's going on because it's a first-time head coach, first-time defensive coordinator, first-time offensive coordinator,
first-time general manager. Well, and there was some sort of known commodity, even with Cliff Kings, where we knew kind of the concept of his offense. Vance Joseph, Vance Joseph was a known commodity defensively. Steve Keim had his tendencies on how he approached things. So yeah, definitely 2018 when. And in fairness, Cliff Kingsbury was not a first-time head coach. He was just a first-time head coach in the NFL.
Right, and so that's, we're picking up things and kind of trying to figure out ways to continue to, what is it, milk that seed or whatever they say. And, just working towards things, but it's also good because it gives us a chance to conversate and talk about, what's going on and what we know and where things are going.
Absolutely. What we're going to start with in this episode, basically have four topics. We, Budda Baker and some disrespect from some publications, rankings from Pro Football Focus where they rank the Cardinals offensive line, their wide receivers, and with the conclusion of the offseason program, OTA's minicamp, we'll kind of talk about what our biggest takeaways were. I've got a couple of topics saved for the next show later on in the week, and then I'm sure we'll find other content from elsewhere that we can discuss. So let's start off with Budda Baker. We know and love Budda Baker. Cardinals fans know Budda Baker is great. NFL players, NFL head coaches believe Budda Baker is great. And here's the thing. Nobody outside of Arizona, heck, a lot of people within Arizona don't believe anything about the Cardinals this year. And so the Cardinals are getting woefully ranked across the board. I think there's two big snubs when it comes to Budda Baker recently. CBS Sports released their top 100 players. Budda did not make the list. He did make honorable mention, but more importantly, and I think which is more egregious, is Touchdown Wire, Doug Farrar, buddy of mine from the network, but he put together a list of the NFL's top 11 safeties. Budda Baker did not make the cut, and he didn't make the cut in 9 honorable mentions. So in the words from Touchdown Wire, I guess, which is kind of based on specific measure. Budda Baker's not even a top 20 safety. What do you say to both of those? That Budda Baker not a top 100 player and Budda Baker not even a top 20 safety?
I don't know. All these guys have their own opinions and things like that. And as the great saying goes, opinions are like, I guess we can tone it down, buttholes. Everybody has one and they all stink. And so, it's not, Doug's fault. He's giving his opinion and he's paid to do so. And so I disagree with it. I don't have a problem with Budda being outside the top 5. After that, I think you're really kind of stretching. I would, going through the list, we don't have to go through all the list, but like I would take him in the last couple of years. I would still take him over Tyrann Mathieu. Matthew's, phenomenal, but I'd still take him over Mathieu. I think he's a step above Mathieu right now. I would take him over who's number 5. I would take him over Javon Holland, who's number 6. I would take him over Kevin Byard, who I think is like taking a step 7th. Yeah. Who's taking a step back this year. I think actually Jesse Bates is probably too low on this list for what his achievements have been lately. And then I would take him over to Sean Gibson, who's 9, Justin Simmons 10, and Von Bell 11. So, I mean, those are things. So if you want to say, the guys above him, are, sorry, I'm getting back to, Jordan Poyer at 4, CJ Gardner-Johnson at 3, Quandre Diggs at 2, and then
Minka Fitzpatrick
at 1. That's fine. The interesting thing is this. I think the NFL has told us what they thought of CJ Gardner-Johnson. I think the NFL's kind of told us what they think of Tyrann Mathieu, and I love Matthews, literally one of my favorite players of all time. And so, it's interesting that I feel like sometimes guys have takes on guys, and so they kind of cling to those takes. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. I'm not saying.
Well, it's interesting because if there's one thing we know, because we know that the writers respect Budda, we know that the fans, the coaches and players, because of the Pro Bowl nods that he gets, he's got the All Pro a couple years ago. He's always among either first team, second team, or he's close. He's getting votes every single year for All Pro. However, anything that's including any sort of analytic metrics, Pro Football Focus never rates him high, and as a result, a lot of what like Doug Farrar does is metrics based on a lot of things, and Budda never measures up analytically. It's very interesting because he's an impact football player without having high end analytic metrics other than maybe grade.
Yeah, and that's something that you see, in these situations. I think sometimes people look at analytics a little too much and things like that. Like, it's also tough, when you look at it for a guy like Budda playing on one of the worst defenses in the NFL. And this is something, you and I have talked about, right? About when this trade request or pay me situation came up. It's not a shot at Budda, because I do think he's a top 7 safety in the NFL. It's the fact that even think about that list. Obviously the Steelers have a great defense, fantastic defense. After that, the correlation of and again, what are we basing the rankings on? This, that, or the other. Defensive performance, so to speak, is what you kind of look at. And when you look at the I guess that, like, I don't know, if you want to look at like DVOA, for instance, and the defensive rank DVOA, Tennessee's ranked 1, I believe. I could be wrong. Don't shoot me if I'm wrong. I think Tennessee was 1, San Francisco was 2, Buffalo was 3, Miami was 4. All their safeties are in this ranking. That's not a coincidence, right? Because like when you have really good players in front of you, it makes your job easier, and it also makes you look better.
And you'll notice something about almost all of these guys. These are all so. Budda gets used from what we know about the Cardinals. He's used. It appears to be in a greater variety of ways than these particular safeties. They're used more specifically for coverage, as opposed to, well, Budda does stuff in coverage, but they use him a lot of different ways as well. And a lot of the impact that he makes is the fact that he erases other mistakes because of the speed with which he plays the game. And so you'll notice these are higher end coverage guys. Budda can keep up with pretty much anyone. The one thing he does have at the disadvantage of is obviously his height and length, which make him a disadvantage for, that we've seen the battles with George Kittle and how they go both ways. But you'll notice a trend with pretty much the guys across this list. They're not as the versatile safeties who blitz or play more in the box. They are stronger in coverage. In fact, what I was kind of shocked to see, Derwin James only received honorable mention in this list.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that too. The other thing I think this shows us, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, is that the rankings don't necessarily reflect the financial compensation
Correct.
of these guys, right? And so I think that's an interesting way to kind of look at it as well. Is you've got every player or group in this situation, and if you just look at safeties, because they don't break it down into free and strong, and the overall ability to disseminate the two are so different now, because they line these guys up everywhere. But you look at it, you mentioned it, Derwin James is the number 1 ranked, and we'll use just average yearly salary. But Derwin James is number 1 at $19 million. Minkah Fitzpatrick is number 2, and he's Doug's top guy. Number 3 is Jamal Adams at almost $18 million.
Granted, Jamal Adams has kind of fallen off a cliff. We'll see what happens with his health this year.
Right, and then number 4 on the paid list is Harrison Smith, who's making $16 million a year, and then Justin Simmons is 5, and Budda Baker 6 in payment. And then after him is Eddie Jackson, who, again, not on the top 11 list. You also have, then you have Kevin Byard, then you have Marcus Williams. By the way, guess who's number 10 or 11 on this list? Jalen Thompson. So when you look at the average salary, and I know that's a fickle way to do it with how everybody kind of manipulates the cap consistently, it's really interesting just to look at it and say, oh, this is the Cardinals, based on what Doug Farrar believes, are severely overpaying their safeties.
Right.
Severely.
Interestingly, and in the top 100, 7 safeties cracked that list, and that includes a guy like Harrison Smith. Some of the names on there make sense. Meekin's in there, but yeah, the names that make the Pete Prisco's top 100 are more of the household names, and And if you have 7 safeties in the top 100, including Harrison Smith, who is number 7, I think he comes at number 98, it makes sense why Budda might not be in the top 100. Because as a player across the NFL, I wouldn't put him in like the top 50. I'd put him in the back half, in the 70, 75 range. But that's not against anything against Budda. It's about where he ranks as a safety, 1, and 2, where safeties rank in impact as a player.
Yeah, and I think those are again really difficult to kind of disseminate, because I still do feel like this is a slight to Budda.
Absolutely. Well, and I frame it like this. The top 100, okay, it's hard to get any Cardinals on that list this year based on what things are happening. I kind of get that. But to say that you wouldn't even put Budda in the top 20 of safeties, that just feels like a gross oversight. Like, did you just forget that? Did we forget about the Cardinals because they're terrible, and then you just overlook him?
Yes,
that's just kind of what it feels like. Because I mean, you've got like Grant Delpit, a guy that we like coming out of college. Has Grant Delpit done anything in the NFL yet?
Right, exactly, and so, it's just an interesting. I don't know, man. Like, I just feel like there's a lot of times that that people think too much about this and like try to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Different. You know what I'm saying? Like, they try too hard to be different. or penalize a guy for being on a bad team. But at the same time, if that's the thought of Budda, then that would kind of explain why nobody else wants to trade for him, right? Because why would they want to give up anything valuable?
I guess so. Although I will say, that's probably in part because the Cardinals had said, no, we're not going to trade him. But coming up next on the Rise FC Red podcast, the best hour Cardinals talk on the time to talk about off-season rankings. We'll start with the offensive line, and the Cardinals get slided a little bit again. That's coming up next on Rise FC Red. We're back on the Rise FC Red podcast, best hour Cardinals talk on the web. Off-season rankings. Pro Football Focus does them, and that gives us all sorts of things. We will rank the offensive lines in the NFC West, plus players, yada, yada, yada. But as you can expect, the Cardinals do not rank highly. But with a unit that feels like it's perhaps one of its strengths, it's ranked woefully low, and they have them ranked 31st in the NFL, down 7 from previously, ahead of only the Tennessee Titans, who remained dead last. I will say this in terms of the the Cardinals seem to have an entire offensive line built from left tackles, with rookie Paris Johnson Jr. like a shoehorned in at guard, and Josh Jones back to riding the bench after breakout year in 2022. They had 44 penalties as a unit. They were the most penalized offensive line in the NFL. DJ Humphries, through his 8 games last year, had no sacks allowed. They do project Johnson as their starting left guard, which I'm going to question. I know that's, when you look at it on paper outside of it makes sense. You still got veteran Kelvin Beachum who could slide right in right tackle. Then you're looking, they need a left guard. So Paris Johnson makes sense there. I just don't think that's what's going to happen. I think it's going to be Paris Johnson at right tackle. I think it's going to be a battle between the trio of Josh Jones, Dennis Daly, and Elijah Wilkinson, who will batter for that left jaw. And I'll be honest, I think Josh Jones' spot on the roster is tenuous at best, considering the number of offensive linemen with guaranteed salary this year. Kelvin Beachum's salary is fully guaranteed. Elijah Wilkinson has $940,000 of his salary guaranteed. Dennis Daly got a 2-year deal with $400,000 guaranteed salary this year. Josh Jones is going to find, but that said, I guess it does sort of make sense in some ways why you would put the Cardinals fairly low. After all, their starting center right now is Yilda Froholt, and left and left guard is a question mark. And then so you're left with DJ Humphries coming off an injury, Will Hernandez, who, perhaps had his best year last year, and Kelvin Beachum, who is aging but steady. There isn't really anything to get excited about that line other than the potential of Johnson, right?
Yeah, I think that's what you look at. I think if Johnson starts at right tackle and Jones starts at left guard, you just feel a little bit more excited. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work, but I just feel like you are more excited, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, yes. You want your young tackle playing tackle, essentially. Right. You're basically that. And I still really, really like DJ Humphrey, so I believe he's a quality left tackle, and he brings to the table a lot of things in terms of leadership and play that you want for the unit as well. How comfortable, so left guard, center, would you say those are probably the largest question marks and probably are glaring weaknesses on the line?
I mean, obviously there's the question of the center position, and then you have to acknowledge that there's the reality and the question of whether it's left guard or right tackle, a rookie starting, right? And then obviously again with if it is Josh Jones at left guard and Paris at right tackle, you still have to figure out if these guys are good at those positions. Right.
That is true, because we've never seen Josh Jones. Josh Jones has never played left guard. Technically, Paris has never played right tackle. He's played tackle. He's played the right side of the line, but Josh Jones has only played, right tackle and a little some right guard as well. So that'd be and in fairness too, Yelda Froholt's only got 4 games of center under his belt in his career as well. So this is fun. Now a team right ahead of them is the Seahawks, and they have, entering last year, there were big question marks as they had rookies at both tackle positions. Those turned out really well. Charles Cross, Abe Lucas turned out to be very nice. Lucas was especially surprising at right tackle.
Yeah, and you have to look at it. You have to look at it and say their tackles offer more upside at this point, and Damian Lewis is their best player. So 3 positions as opposed to, the way they have it listed 1 for the Cardinals.
I mean, I would say the 2 positions seem pretty solid with DJ and Will.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, so that's the thing is you look at it is, in this stage, would you take Cross or Humphreys? Well, I think the answer would be Cross, because while you probably would start DJ this year, there's a reason they took Paris Johnson, right? Like, you understand that he's kind of closer to the back end of his career than he is right now. But I don't know. It's these are always so subjective, anyways.
and we know the Cardinals are going to rank lowly because they're the Cardinals, and in fairness, the offense around the offensive line impacts how one views the offensive line.
Well, but let me ask you this: like, if you're making this list and you look at like the LA Rams, who on the LA Rams is better than a Cardinals projected starter right now? Like, maybe their right tackle?
Maybe Havenstein, yes. Avila, because you can pencil him in at left guard. You probably, like, if he had been drafted by the Cardinals, you'd be like, he's left guard, right? You slide him in easily right there. But it's interesting because Noteboom might not be their left tackle. It might be Alaric Jackson. Brian Allen right now might not start at center either. They're looking at Coleman Shelton there, who played center mostly there. Mind you, Coleman Shelton, who is a former Cardinals practice squad guy.
Right, and that's those are why I don't get too bent out of shape about them. I look at it more as like they are in the right grouping. They're in the bottom third of the league, and I think that's a fair assessment right now.
That's fair. That's fair. Coming next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on and talk about another position group, the wide receivers, where they rank in the NFL. That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Wide receivers. Cardinals group it was a much more comfortable group not too long ago. When it came to having DeAndre Hopkins. However, where do they rank? They rank quite low, of course. As is the trend with the Arizona Cardinals this offseason. They are at the bottom or near the bottom of every single grouping list. They're not dead last. They're not second to last, but they are number 28. Now, I'd say this is pretty fair because they have major question marks. We saw Hollywood Brown play like a number one receiver through the first 6 games of the season. We've seen flashes of Rondale Moore, Greg Dortch, but yeah, their top 3 receivers right now are tiny receivers, and if you want to, as pass catchers, you want to figure in Zach Ertz and Trey McBride, and then you've got Zach Pascal. You don't expect major numbers from him, but if he has a role on offense, we've seen him twice in his career have more than 600 yards. But yeah, there isn't much about this receiver group that brings fear to any opposing defense, other than the fact they are fast. So Hollywood and Moore give you elite speed, but Moore hasn't done much. It hasn't been utilized in a way to scare defenses yet.
No, and even though Marquise Brown was on a huge trajectory last year, he hasn't lived up to that, right? And he hasn't been able to do it for a full season and stay healthy. So all of those things factor into this. Like, I think Brown can be a legitimate wide receiver 1, but he hasn't done it. So you can't just be like, oh yeah, because immediately with the wide receiver ranking questions comes, okay, who's their top receiver? And so if you rank Brown as like
at best is a middle of like at best.
Yeah, 15 to 17, 18 range.
As a number one receiver.
Yeah, as the number one receiver, as number ones only. Then you go, okay, well, who's their number 2? And then right there, when you don't even know who their number 2 is, that immediately takes them down.
Takes them down so low.
And so you're like, okay, so you have 2 intriguing smaller guys and consistently injured Rondale Moore and priority or undrafted free agent who's 3rd year in the league and finally had like a productive season in Greg Dortch. So, I mean, it's just one of those situations. It's a fair ranking, and I'm actually surprised that there are 4 teams below them.
Well, I will say this: if you look at you look at the Titans, they've got Treylon Burks, but the truth is, you've never heard of any other receivers on their team, and that's
right.
Now that changed when if they signed DeAndre Hopkins, but you can see why they made such a big push for DeAndre Hopkins is because they have Treylon Burks, and then guys you've never heard of. Have you heard of Kyle? I haven't heard of Kyle Phillips, Nick Westbrook, Ikhine, a name I'm not even going to attempt because he's a tight end. But yeah.
Yeah. Oko Wonko. You can say.
Yes.
Well, and
those guys behind him, because you don't have a true, now you've got the Carolina Panthers don't have a true number one, right? That's proven it. The Houston Texans definitely, like, if Robert Woods is your number one, then you're in a tough spot. The Patriots, it's interesting because I think the Patriots would go above Arizona. I think
it's because the uncertainty surrounding Juju. Because isn't there some questions if he's going to be able to play this year? I think I saw something on that. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But I swear I saw something the other day about Juju's having some injuries.
Well, interestingly enough, because that's not mentioned in this spot, is that they replaced Jacoby Myers with Juju Smith-Schuster, and while I guess Hollywood has a higher ceiling for a number one than Juju, though Juju has had more production over a while. But I would say that their supporting cast might be better than, like, probably you'd trust them more than you would the Cardinals.
Yeah,
guys.
And the Mike, what is his name? Mike Giardi, for NFL.com, he was the one that said it. He's still dealing with a knee issue. So, and he didn't play that well last year either, playing in the best offense in the NFL. So I mean, I get it a little bit, but yeah, I mean, Tennessee, Carolina, Houston all belong below them right now. I think New England's a coin flip. And then from there, it's again the same thing. Like, Indianapolis has Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce, who are intriguing guys. The Packers have Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, who are intriguing guys. The Giants have Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard when healthy. So, like, those are all intriguing guys. And if you like them more than Marquise Brown, then you're like, oh, I'm going to give them the nod over, just one guy. So,
and that becomes really important then what the production they get from their tight ends, a healthy Ertz, a healthy McBride, and then what can they get out of Michael Wilson? And now, if you guys listen to the solo show, I kind of went over the worry about counting on Michael Wilson so much as a rookie. There's a lot to about it, but
100% counting on him is a huge thing.
The hype train right now, just let's slow that down, because when he said he's light years ahead of where he was in rookie minicamp, that's really not saying anything. It just means that he was lost in rookie minicamp. He might not be completely lost now.
But like we were saying earlier, like, there's not a whole lot of positive going on right now. So you got to create positive in that situation still. And I think that's how they're doing it.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talking Web, we will wrap things up for our last segment. Takeaways from the offseason program. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web, talking about what we took away from the offseason program for the Arizona Cardinals, which means, they had the offseason workouts, then they had OTAs, they had their first minicamp, OTAs, and then mandatory minicamp. I think probably the biggest storyline across the board, aside from Budda Baker, when we're talking about football, was where we saw Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins playing, and Simmons, who now officially is a safety, whatever that means in terms of usage, because guess what, the question that I poked fun of in the last show when I was on the solo show is, what will the defense look like with Budda, Jalen Thompson, Isaiah Simmons on the field at the same time? Like, that was the last 2 years. But Simmons to safety, Zaven Collins getting a lot of work off the edges, outside linebacker. Those probably are, for me, the biggest takeaways, because there's anything that we can get out of that is that, okay, that two of their most important defensive players appear to be moving.
Yeah, and, I was looking at it, how they used Isaiah last year, and I don't know how much it's necessarily going to change outside of, maybe it's going to be labeled as he's playing safety as opposed to linebacker. Obviously with Zaven, I think it's just going to be a whole different ball game for him. And we'll see how he does and how he fits in with it.
Yeah. Second takeaway for me this offseason was we learned about Colt McCoy's mystery injury, that it's not major. They worked him up with an elbow, but I can't remember who it was. Someone on ESPN said it was. I don't know if they're reporting it. I don't know where they got it from, but suggesting that Colt McCoy would not be ready for the start of the season. Like, wait, what? He was practicing. That's going to be fine. And the fact that DJ Humphries worked himself back onto the field, that he avoided surgery, and that appears that he's on track with everything. So for me, were those two very important injuries, because we don't know how far along Zach Ertz or Kyler Murray is.
Correct. And those are important things. And, we'll see how it all kind of plays out. But right now, we just know that, like you said, like the main kind of, obviously tight end position's different, but the main guys expected to potentially play over them in this situation are healthy and ready to go. And that's a big part of what's going on right now, because they just got to continue to get ready and get prepared for next season, and get ready to put a competitive product on the field, knowing that right now they're thin on talent, right? So it's going to be a scheme heavy situation, and having guys that are going to play a role in that early, healthy and practicing is, I don't want to say the most important thing possible, but it's one of, right?
Absolutely. From all the comments that we've heard, we don't know what actual play calling will look like, but running the ball will be a focus. That's another mild takeaway for what we can take from this. What are some of the things that have stood out to you personally?
I just think it's that they're trying different things. They're changing the culture and perception of what they want to do, and that's not surprising. I mean, you look at where Petzing comes from, offensively, his backgrounds with whether it's Minnesota or Cleveland. Those are offenses that do a lot of things from the pocket. Those are offenses that do a lot of things with play action under center, and from in the running game. And now maybe you can get a quarterback that's even better at doing that stuff, right? Or has more talent or high end ability to do that stuff, and maybe you see that growth.
I think this is across the board for the offseason is the changed narrative about Kyler Murray, where he's been present. Everything that is coming out of Cardinals camp is positive. There's no more weird reports of that. And the message that we're hearing from teammates and coaches is how hard he's hitting his rehab, which, and I'm going to say this again, I've said it a few times, the notion that the Cardinals are going to keep Kyler out of the lineup longer than is necessary for him to be ready to play. I really think that that Kyler is going to force the issue, because I think for what they've done, this offseason, it would go sour. The gains that they've made, like the love, the respect, the buy-in that Kyler has, if they shut him down when he's healthy to play, I think that will have a negative effect on him and the relationship with the team moving forward.
Yeah, and I would agree with that situation and that assessment of that situation.
And so while they're not going to rush him back, he's going to push to come back, and they'll be forced to play him when he's ready.
I do also think that there's one big thing, and you know, there's always the potential that this is just off-season hype speak. But I think the accountability talk coming out of this off-season work and camp kind of shows us that this is a different situation than what we were seeing with Cliff and Keim in there. And that's
especially the last 2 years, because I don't think there was anything wrong with how Cliff handled things in 2019 and 2020. But once they experienced the success and they tried to put the team together differently, I think that's where the approach didn't work, when they didn't have more enforced accountability, more coach-driven accountability, where Gannon's not afraid to do that. And I love, and I'm going to say it again. I said it on the show. I've said it on the radio on AM 1060. Jonathan Gannon gives me not the non-annoying, non-a-hole version of Jim Harbaugh, like a kinder, gentler Jim Harbaugh, but just as competitive.
Right, and I think that's accurate.
Anything else of note that you would like to point out for the off-season program?
The old guy is back, right? Aaron Brewer.
Yes, he is. That's the other thing. So 2/3. So no more Andy Lee, but Matt Prater's back, Aaron Brewer's back, and got a new punter, Matt Hawk.
Yeah, so we'll see how that all kind of goes with Prater, Brewer, and Hawk now, right?
Yep, which means hopefully Hawk is a good holder, because Prater, if anything's off kilter, he became a bad kicker.
Right, exactly.
And they signed him for two more years. Oh man, we'll wrap this edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, best hour Cardinals talk on the web. We'll wrap this up. Whether we have a show with Seth or another solo show for me later in the week, that's coming up this week. We will try and churn out more content. In the meantime, hit the revengeofthebirds.com, carswire.com, and listen to Seth's podcast, the original Draft Breakdown podcast. I'm Jess Root. That's Seth Cox. Thanks for listening as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.